Spider-Man has always been one of my favorite superheroes of all time. I just love this iconic superhero. And more as an adult, my favorite kind of superpower or arc that Spider-Man has always gone through is his symbiote arc, and which made me super excited for the latest Spider-Man Marvel video game. They covered symbiote, and as I have been playing it a bit, I haven't seen exactly the payoff of this game, so don't worry about spoilers. But because of this has really made me think about one of my favorite parts of Spider-Man is his journey with the symbiote suit. Hello, I'm No Price Christian Gamer. I love RPGs and JRPGs. I love all kinds of video games, including the Spider-Man games. Marvel Spider-Man games have been great. I love the impact they've done on superhero games in general. They really have vamped up the what we used to know as video games for Spider-Man games. They just took what was classic and made it even better, and I've enjoyed what they've done. This newest game has been such a thrill. I've enjoyed all the different parts they've put into and everything they've been slowly upgraded, except for the Mary Jane missions. I hate those. But with this game, we're tackling this symbiote suit. But favorite aspect, it was the one thing that was shown off that I was like, ooh, this is all I need to play this game. Sure, there's other aspects they showed off that I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that seems cool, but I don't care. Symbiote suit. I love Symbiote Suit. Just the aesthetic and the actual risk-reward system that the symbiote provides. I love this give and take. Last time I played a game that was similar to this was The Web of Shadows. The Web of Shadows presented another symbiote suit, and it gave you several choices of, do you choose to lean into Peter Parker or do you lean into being the symbiote suit? And while so far from what little I've played with the symbiote suit, we haven't had that kind of option yet, I still have enjoyed what the game has provided. Again, we're not spoiling anything. I'm keeping it vague. You will see gameplay be playing over on Hero Scrub, but you don't need to actually have played the game or even know about it. I'm holding off for anybody who's like me who doesn't want to get spoiled by that. But there are things that I want to talk about the symbiote suit, because we have gotten several variations of the symbiote suit story, and from the very bits we've gotten, there's some aspects that are similar to each other, which makes sense. It's trying to tell the same story, but at the same time, there's different things that emphasize different things that I think really showcases something that us as Christians probably relate with. There's two different kind of stories being told with the symbiote story. There's one over here that we're going to first dive into that everybody probably is actually already acknowledged and probably understands a little bit more. It's probably a little bit more on the nose. But the second one is kind of interesting, and it was another one that I thought about that I'm actually going to be sharing with you an interview with one of my old college professors as he talks a little bit more about it. So that's going to be interesting. So stay tuned for that. This first part has to do with the first time ever we actually see the symbiote suit in animated form in the animated series of Spider-Man, the 1994 kind of episode TV show they had. And it's probably one of the most impactful story arcs for what we look to today as like the symbiote story that Peter Parker goes on. Stuff like the bell tower of Peter actually tearing off the symbiote suit that way. But there's other parts in it that I love so much, because the origination of the symbiote suit was actually just a weird alien suit, just something to like change up the look of Spider-Man and make it actually easier to draw Spider-Man, which actually turned out not even working. It was still a pain to draw Spider-Man in this new symbiote way, so it's like, okay, that didn't work. But it was usually just a thing that's like, oh, it took him out for joyrides at night and he didn't like that. That was basically it. It isn't what we look to today as the symbiote suit. But watching this thing, it really showcases the escalation of the symbiote suit. It doesn't take long after Peter has had the symbiote suit that he is just out of control, almost losing grip of what he used to be. And it doesn't stop there. It just escalates to the point to where we see Spider-Man literally screaming out to Shocker that he's going to chase him to the ends of the earth. And what this really looked like to me with this escalation is the similarities to addiction. Now, addiction can be of many different things. Could be just simply sugar, could be caffeine, could be coffee, baby. But in my case, I'm going to be referring to drugs. That's a big escalation for me. We could even talk about sexual sin. I haven't shared it much, but I, as a young age, actually got into drugs and became addicted. And I had to actually go to a Christian-based rehab called Teen Challenge, to where I actually got to have the opportunity to change my life. opportunity to change my life. So based on my own circumstances and from what I've known from other testimonies and other people who've gone through an addiction and struggled with it, a main component is not having control. This self-control, this discipline to restrict yourself from making choices or to actually make certain choices. Addiction really erodes your possibility of control, your possibility of what you actually want. It takes control and dictates what you do. Your choices change to the point where you don't even know who you are anymore. And similar to this Spider-Man, I feel like this Symbiote Suit really symbolizes this in a lot of ways. Because we have Jesus Christ, we can lean on him, we can let go our sins and be forgiven. He has already died for us, and we have hope in him. So ultimately, in reality, we're fine. There is no possibility of this sin to restrict us. But the feeling when you're in this sin cycle, when you're in this addiction, it can easily feel hopeless of not being able to have your own self-control, your own discipline, because it takes a lot of that to fight off against addiction. The second part of this Symbiote Suit that I saw in a different iteration in the same Raimi trilogy. While doing research for the second part, what I saw was this idea of unbalance. It's even presented in this new game of the idea of balance and how you need this. And this is a classic storyline or a struggle for Peter Parker. His struggle of his social life of Peter Parker with Spider-Man. And the escalation with the Symbiote Suit adds this escalation of a possible solution when really it actually erodes and is more of a problem. The YouTube channel Overly Sarcastic Productions, they did a cover of the symbiote with the new release of this game, so I watched some of it for research purposes, and they pointed out a great point that I liked about the same Raimi trilogy. When you look at it as a trilogy, the structure of the flow point of Peter Parker and his struggles of going from forced on responsibility to then struggling with choosing to be responsible, and then on the third one, this idea of once he got the symbiote suit, he has this idea of this really gives you a option, a solution to be a really good Spider-Man. Not because of, oh, you're the most heroic, but because you are powerful. It gives you the strength to deal with supervillains. And it helps you in this case. Sure, it leads him into actually being a villain, and that is the downside. He is able to actually kill. Good riddance. He went with murderous intent right off the bat against Sandman. And it was this idea of unbalance that reminded me of something too scary of an idea that's too close to my heart. As Christians, this doesn't impact to all Christians, but to some, very much. For Christians in ministry, there's a common problem about unbalance. And this idea of balance of between your job, your ministry, and in a lot of cases, your family. How do you balance these? There's been countless of testimonies of families who have been hurt because one family member was in ministry, and with their ministry going so far to push to really do everything they can for that ministry, they ended up sacrificing their family. For me, I could totally relate with the person who gave everything for the ministry, even accidentally sacrificing their family. Because there's this idea of, as a Christian, haven't we already given up our life for Christ? Haven't we given everything? Aren't we slaves to Christ? Aren't our only goal is for God's ministry, for service? And while that's true, there is still something when you become a family, there is something about responsibility. There's something there that you are supposed to take care of your family, but that balance of how much do you do each is unknown. It's a gray area. It's so much of a struggle point that it's easy to lean on one side or the other and neglect one or the other and cause pain. I wanted to talk to you with this idea, and I feel like I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it. It's one thing where it's the symptom or the problem has been mentioned a few times, but not the dissection or dissection of the actual issue or the situation of like, what's going on? What it is basically the unbalance of Christian ministries or people in ministries and their struggle. And it's specifically such a unique niche problem because it's not only do you have to be serving in ministry, but you also have to be in a spot of responsibility, I believe. So this specifically relies on somebody who is a husband and wife, has children, somewhere where they have someone that they are dependent on and they need to actually support and be there with. Growing up, I always had this problem I kind of mentioned earlier is of this idea as when I came to Christ, I given everything up to Christ. I am a slave. Everything's up to him, even to the point of living my life as ministry to him. And this idea is I give everything for him, 100%. But once you get married, or you have someone that you have to take care of, whether a child that you adopt or etc., your responsibility, your priorities do change to some regards. And we've seen different kind of accounts or testimonies of people who deep down, even though they grew up in a place where they're close to the church, whether it's a kid who grew up with their parents being in ministry as a pastor or missionaries, were hurt ultimately within the family based on the sacrifice of the person in ministry. And this idea of what was right. Was it right for this person to give it all?
Yeah.
And the reality of sacrificing. So that's kind of what I want to talk to you today, is see where you're at as somebody who has more knowledge than me when it comes to ministry.
Experience, maybe.
You have experience, you have wisdom, you have knowledge, and, I love to dissect some of that and hear somebody who is been alive longer than me, has been
Called me old.
ministry focused longer than me, or at the very least, even not more, if not more, still just different in a different area. And so it's like, I do know you have an interesting point of view that I would love to hear.
Wow. As you were, we had talked about this a little bit, but as you were setting it up, you've kind of opened a really big box for me.
Sure.
And we'll just have to see how much time we have to unpack all of that. I want to start biblically.
Okay.
Because what you talked about, when you give your life to Christ, it is 100%. You are a slave. We don't like that term, but it is used throughout the New Testament that is the relationship.
Yeah.
And Jesus calls us to put him above family. He quotes an Old Testament passage. It said, if you're not willing to leave father or mother, you can't be with me. And I work with a lot of students who've had to do that with father and mother. The dynamic changes when you bring a husband or wife into that picture. I've experienced that. Before we moved across the country, I sat down with my in-laws specifically and said, we will be leaving you in order to pursue this ministry. We can circle back to that later if you want.
Sure.
But the Apostle Paul also mentions, hey, if you get married, your attention is divided.
Yeah.
He said, if you don't get married, you can just focus all in on ministry.
It's great.
But if you do, your attention's going to be divided. And I've experienced that firsthand. And my wife and I consider our marriage a ministry partnership.
Yeah.
We've tried to model that for our kids. But they've taken an awful lot of my attention. And I hope we get into some details there. But I saw a couple of examples growing up. I'm a preacher's kid. Dad was a preacher. And the church where my dad preached was an hour away. And there were times, especially in my early teen years, where I felt like I was less important to my dad than really troubled people who lived an hour away. These are people who did not want my dad's help. But because my dad loved Jesus, he wanted to help. And that was hard for me for a while. And my dad was great. My dad loved me, gave me time and attention, and my siblings as well. And we reconciled those things. But it was hard for me. And it felt like if I was a good kid, then he didn't need to give me attention. But troubled people would get his attention as a minister. And I admire my father, and he taught me a lot by example about what it means to be a minister, but that was hard growing up. And another experience I had was as a student. I had amazing professors. In fact, the man that I took the most classes from in my college years taught me about the New Testament, taught me Greek, actually taught my father Greek as well.
Yeah.
So we just became friends. He knew me very closely. He could tell my handwriting, he could tell my writing style in Greek, because we just knew each other, and that's the way he treated his students. Some of his kids didn't like him because he spent more time with us as students than he did with his own kids. And again, I just mentioned two men I admire.
Yeah.
And I had a good relationship with, but that balance is hard. But it is a tremendous pressure because the desire to serve well, the desire to serve Jesus, and to show up and do the programs at church, and to do what my dad did, which is help people in need, and do that well.
Yeah.
It's honestly a little easier to do that than it is to do it with my wife and kids.
Why is that?
When we're done with this, you're going to go home.
Okay.
When I'm done with the day, I'm going to go home. And my wife and kids are going to be there. And the pressure of getting it right is huge.
Yeah.
And it's not, hey, I've got this 1 hour where we're drinking coffee talking about your problems where I can pour into you.
Yeah.
It's I'm pouring into you this hour and the next hour for the rest of your life. Oh, and you're my kids. I got to do this right because it's all my responsibility.
Yeah.
That's the pressure.
Yeah.
Now, what God and I have worked on over the years is, no, I have a role, but it's God's responsibility. They are His kids, and I get to play a role in that.
Okay.
And I'm honestly dealing better with that now that most of them are out of the house than I did when they were in the house.
Sure.
But the pressure on me was huge, and I think it was compounded because I was the minister.
Yeah, it just added to it. As a, what do we do about this?
Okay.
What do we do about this potential problem if you're somebody who is in this opportunity to possibly cause this problem or don't want to suffer the same mistakes? What do? We kind of hit on one that's like a small part of it, and I think it's still important. It's not like a actionable thing, but it's important. It's having grace with yourself. I think that's an important part of understanding, not in like the futility of nihilism of like, oh, we're gonna fail all the time, but in a way to not stress about the pressure completely and crumble to it. Is like, hey, understanding you are gonna make mistakes.
So one of the things my wife and I say to each other is, we are not perfect. Number two, we made a good decision here. And number three, the kid's decision is not my responsibility.
Yeah.
And none of those go down easily because we carry the responsibility heavily.
Yeah.
But we say those three things. And we could look back on it and go, nope, mess that one up.
It's hard to make suggestions about like what to do instead, because it's almost like these are always almost like too idealized of like the most opportunity, like 100%. It's like, obviously, spend more time with kids. It's like, yeah, but in real life you get busy.
There it is.
It doesn't always work like that.
Very
and
good.
So it's like, I think there's still a point to try to make these goals almost.
Yes.
But we do need to find a way to make them realistic. But like, if we can, it's still at the very least, I think I'd rather have a goal that's idealistic than no goals.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Because like,
you're speaking my language.
Otherwise, you're gonna set yourself up for failure, obviously, and it's just you're living in almost hopelessness.
Yes. In the real world, what we need is balance.
Yeah.
We made this decision together.
Yeah.
And I knew it was going to be a sacrifice, and I knew the things she does at work are going to take more time, and her master's degree is going to take more time. And we also know it's for a season.
Okay.
So we've also made that decision of there are times in ministry especially where this is the season where we're really busy.
Okay.
But we have worked really hard on saying, okay, when this season is over, I'm back to working 40 hours a week, not 70 hours a week, because I'm not going to do that perpetually.
Okay.
Because the results are not good. I'm going to say no to some people. I'm not going to say no to an emergency.
Sure.
But not everything is an emergency.
I was going to say that's outside of the situation. That's different. I really like the idea of one, communicating, not just communicating of, hey, I'm doing this. This is important. It is important to share that and not just do the thing. Obviously, it shares, makes agreement, but actually coming together and seeing what works with each other and agreeing. It's the idea of unification, unifying together. We are on board together.
And over time, I've been married for 28 years and always been in ministry. And over time, that gets easier because we know what the expectations are because we talk about it. People around us,
setting up
what's
boundaries.
important, setting boundaries
of understanding, hey, this is the reality, and respecting that and building a relationship.
Now, because we have a relationship, if I say to you, no, I can't meet with you tonight because I have a date with my wife, you'd be like, no problem.
I respect that.
If I say that in a church setting, I'm sorry, you're going to go do something fun instead of taking care of me? Yes, I am.
It's important.
But what I may say is this: I can't do that because I have a previous appointment.
Sure. Yeah.
That's not a lie.
It's not.
And my relationship with my wife is every bit as important as what you're dealing with right now.
Sure. Setting up boundaries is very important for not only those around you, of relationships, work. It's important to set up boundaries. I also like what you were saying about with scheduling, of how it's not always one time.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just, this is the schedule and we'll make that work. Because what I've seen just doing research for this kind of media sphere is it's very common for people to get burned out because they get focused in, because the platforms really reward finding what works and doing that, manufacturing that, when in reality that just leads to burnout, doing the same thing and leading into the expectations, besides switching it up and letting yourself have change. And I really like this idea of not only having change for your flexibility of your schedule, but being flexible and working together between your other people who you're working with to understand, like, hey, what works? And the reality is things do change. Things change with you, and things change with things around you.
Absolutely. And you have to adjust to the situation, because ministry does require production, just like you were talking about. The Old Testament idea was you work sun up to sundown 6 days a week, and then on the seventh day you don't do anything. That's a really great concept. And honestly, I feel better when I do that. Now, I don't work 16-hour days anymore very often. I've done that a lot in my life. I don't do that anymore. I'll work an 8 to 10-hour day most days, and then I will do something other than work.
The metaphor I would like to look at, similar to that, is, since I like working out, is the idea of working out is you can't always do the same thing.
Okay.
No matter where you're at. If you get older, it's not about doing the same number thing or the same number of weight or even reps. It's about how hard are you pushing yourself? Are you pushing yourself too hard, or are you pushing yourself the right amount to where you're getting a good workout, you're not breaking anything, you're not going to be like dead to do it another time later, and you're not doing it too little to where no impact.
That's a very good analogy. That means saying no to certain things. That means saying, I'm going to close my laptop at this time, and I'm going to be with people. And for me, it also means, okay, I've been with people, and now I'm not going to be with people.
My more push, again, it's a push, because I do think it's important for us to have the mindset, the perspective of not necessarily just simply like communicating with God or prayer, but the idea of, I do this thing and I'm having faith that God's got it. I have faith that this is what God wants, or God will use it, and I'm trusting if I'm wrong, God will correct. Like it's a hard thing, because it's one of those things where we get so busy with things, it's hard to keep that connection, and so that's where it feels so ideal, but like, it's still important ultimately.
But I totally agree with what you're saying, and it is so hard for me, because I feel responsible for everything. I feel like I've got to get it right. And God has been trying to teach me this my whole life, but I'm coming back to, it's not up to me that the college succeeds. It's not up to me that the church succeeds. And it's not up to me that my family succeeds. And I want to do it well. But the freedom to do it well when it doesn't all depend on me is tremendous. But I have to bring it before God. I have to trust him, and I have to say, God, this is your family that you have given me a role in. Since it's ultimately up to God, you should have no responsibility. No! It is a responsibility, and it is heavy. Since it's ultimately up to God, I don't have to get a job, and I don't have to help around the house, and I don't have to be attentive, and I don't have to be loving, and we don't have to... Oh, wait, none of that sounds right, does it?
No.
Does Bethany watch this? I mean,
shall we keep on sitting so that grace shall abound?
May again it's May it never be. I'm not speaking in tongues, that was Greek.
It's all Greek to me.
Yeah, that joke's not funny. Yeah.
It is funny to some.
But it is, and I'll have to wrap it up with this.
That's okay.
There is responsibility.
Yeah.
But it is ultimately up to God. And that's true with your family. That's true with the ministry. And that's true with this balance. And balance is never perfect. But balance does get you through.
If you want to hear more about my thoughts on Spider-Man and the Symbiote Suit and even superheroes as a whole and that whole risk reward and even about evil superheroes, well, check out the podcast, Bread Ends, the Christian podcast. It's where I and one of my close friends who I used to go to college with, we are talking about Christian things, and it's our podcast. And on the most recent one, the one that's linked here, you can definitely see us talking about superheroes in our modern day, baby. But I hope you guys have a good day. Jesus loves you. Bye, guys.